Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. This is your brother Lawrence. I have a quick update to share with you today. All right, so let's get into it without wasting any time. So yesterday, Pastor Ted Wilson actually made a sad announcement on Facebook about his wife, and he said, I want to read. This morning, Nancy slipped on a wet walkway entering the General Conference building and broke her femur. She was taken to Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center and given extraordinary care and service. She had surgery and she has done superbly. She is very healthy, so her recovery should be excellent. She is so grateful to God, the Master Physician. Praise be to Him. Thank you for your prayers. So after Pastor Ted Wilson made this public announcement on his Facebook page, many Seventh-day Adventists responded, friends. Many SDAs responded, assuring Pastor Ted Wilson that they were going to pray for Nancy Wilson. So when you look at this side of the video, you would see the many comments that were made by Seventh-day Adventists praying for Nancy Wilson, all right, and encouraging Pastor Ted Wilson as well. That was so beautiful. Now, few hours after this particular first post by Pastor Ted Wilson, he made another update about his wife, and I want to share that update with you right now. He wrote, Nancy slept well and is doing great. It's amazing. We praise God. She has begun physical therapy and is doing well. Hopefully, she can go home tomorrow. The surgeon was in this morning and everything went so well in the surgery. He said she had strong bones. We again praise God. The administrative team of the medical center visited us this Tuesday morning. Anthony Stahl, CEO, Michael Kruger, CFO, and Dr. Rost, VP for Medical Affairs. We cannot say enough good things about Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center and the staff. We thank wonderful World Church Health leaders, Dr. Peter Landless and Dr. Zeno Charles Marcel, for their excellent intervention and help. Praise God for dedicated Christian leaders and healthcare professionals. Last evening, Pastor and Miss Edwin Kohler visited, prayed, and brought flowers representing the World Church leaders assembled at the annual council who have been praying for Nancy. Thank you to all of you for your prayers for Nancy. God, the Master Physician, is blessing so wonderfully. So friends, that was the second update coming from Pastor Ted Wilson about his wife Nancy, who fell while she was entering the building of the General Conference. But we thank God that Nancy is doing well. Praise be to His name. We are still praying for Sister Nancy because she is our mother. She is our mother in the faith. All right. And I hope you are also praying for Sister Nancy. All right. The wife of Pastor Ted Wilson. So friends, this is actually a short update that I wanted to share with you about Pastor Ted Wilson and his wife. All right. Let us keep the leaders of the church in our prayers. Let us keep all Seventh-day Adventists that are not well also in our prayers. All right. There are more stories coming up. Don't go anywhere. Stay right here on this channel.
So thank you for all of your prayers and your support. I wake up every day to serve the church, the Lord, and be with my family, and that is a privilege indeed, and one that I'm more keenly aware of each day these days. Nevertheless, the term exorbitant privilege is the term used about the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency of the world since World War II. And here's a definition. Exorbitant privilege refers to the advantages that the United States gains from having the U.S. dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, allowing it to borrow at a lower rate and run larger trade deficits without facing a balance of payments crisis. This status also provides economic influence and stability in global markets. That's the exorbitant privilege of the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Now, there's actually two parts to this. One is the U.S. dollar itself, is that it's being used for the majority of world trade transactions and financial transactions. So countries have to keep a supply of US dollars in order to be able to trade. The second part to this is that the US Treasury bonds is the primary reserve asset, meaning that when countries have an excess of US dollars that it doesn't need right away, they need to invest it into something, and they usually invest that into US Treasury bonds. And then perhaps there's a third factor, which is that the US financial system is used globally to conduct trade. This has allowed the US economy to thrive and maintain its global dominance in finances for many decades. Central banks around the world has held many US dollars and treasury bonds, in effect lending money to the US government to continue to expand its economy. But the world is changing. In fact, there's a significant move away from the US dollar by central banks and countries. If you look at this chart, it shows the US dollar, US global treasury bonds, in blue, that the foreign governments are holding, and the yellow line, or the orange line, is the holdings of gold. And as you can see more recently, that the holdings of gold has increased and the holdings of treasury has decreased. Central banks around the world are turning more and more towards gold as their preferred reserve asset and reducing the amount of US treasuries that they hold. This is particularly true in the past 5 years. In 2022, as a result of the Russia and Ukraine war, the US confiscated the US treasury bonds held by Russia and kicked them out of the SWIFT system so that they couldn't send wire transfers around the world. This was a wake-up call for many countries. They worried that their bonds could be confiscated as well if they did something to upset the United States. This was seen as the weaponization of the US dollar and the US dollar system. More recently, trade wars, tariffs have caused countries to begin transacting more in their own local currencies in bilateral trade rather than using the US dollar. And China now uses more renminbi for their trade than they do the US dollar. So the world is changing. This trend is certainly a problem for the United States as the United States continues in their deficit spending. In spite of the initial efforts, you might have heard of DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. They were trying to cut costs for the US government. But in fact, the US government continues to spend at the same levels it has in the past year. You can see the red line, which is this year. It's very similar to the blue dotted line, which was last year. And the years before, you can see that as well. It's very difficult to cut costs, to cut programs once they're in place. And so we're seeing that the amount of deficit spending, meaning borrowing to fund the government, continues to increase. This is another reason why I really appreciate Elder Douglas and the leadership of the church to try and hold in check our expenses and not allowing it to balloon. Because once you put a spending program in place, it's really hard to pull that back. And we really need to continue to invest in mission, and as Elder Douglas said, not the machinery. But it's not just the US government. Other governments, particularly in the West, but around the world, are engaging in deficit spending, borrowing, issuing bonds to try and continue to grow their economy. It's in the nature of politicians to want to be reelected, and nobody gets reelected when the country is going through a recession. So they want to continue with their economic growth, and so they continue to borrow and spend. You can see here that the US government debt has continued to grow. And now we're at $27 trillion. It's an unimaginable number, but it seems to be growing at an exponential rate. And partly because we're borrowing money now to pay for interest on money that we've already borrowed, right? You try that with your credit card and see how well that works. The ballooning of the debt will continue because we don't have our spending under control. Certainly, other countries are concerned about the stability of the dollar and that the dollars that they hold, the bonds that they hold, are rapidly being devalued. Another impact from all of this deficit spending is inflation. Inflation continues to rise, and it's at a little bit higher level than we have anticipated or that central banks have anticipated. You know, we are seeing about a 3% rate for the next several quarters in the United States, higher than the 2% that the central bank is targeting. You know, and 3% doesn't sound like a lot, but as it accumulates year after year after year, you know, it certainly impacts our spending, our consumer spending. And certainly that has an impact on our work, right? Every dollar that we get in tithe doesn't go as far as it used to go. And so we need to be careful, again, of our spending and continue to be, you know, but we do continue to be blessed by our members being very generous. Another impact that we've seen more recently is immigration, right? We sat in the nominating committee yesterday. We talked about how, you know, the difficulty of bringing people in, representative of the world church, and how difficult it is given our current environment, the climate that we have in this world. And that's sort of a microcosm of what's happening in this country, and certainly in other countries around the world as well. We see that the number of people immigrating to the United States in 2025 has dramatically dropped, 2.3 million drop in immigration compared to the years past. And that's certainly going to have an impact on economic growth for the country. And certainly there are some positive impacts. We've seen the prime age working employment numbers for the United States improve a little bit. But when you have, you know, 2.3 million less people coming into the country, that's certainly going to have an impact. And as we can see, many of us are aging and, you know, coming up retirement age. We need those younger people to come in and work. And it's good to see that we as a church have brought in more young people to do the work. So what does this all mean for the church? Well, you know, well, let me say one thing. The dollar is not, and I repeat, not likely to lose the reserve currency status anytime in the near future. It's just technically not possible. But there are certainly shifting winds that we need to be aware of, right? And certainly there is a strong eastern wind that's blowing, for sure. And I always think about how this affects and how this will play out in the future. As the U.S. influence on global financial stage continues to diminish, particularly how will prophecy be fulfilled? Because in the Bible, in the spirit of prophecy, we're told that the United States will lead the world in Sunday worship and instituting Sunday laws. So how will the U.S. maintain its influence around the world when we see its influence diminishing? So those are questions that I don't have an answer to. We certainly seen the weaponization of the U.S. dollar, the U.S. financial system, and the U.S. economy in the last several years. And will that lead to the fulfillment of prophecy? I don't know. And in our work, the changing financial system and the national alliances, how will that impact our work, our ability to conduct business the way we've done, to move funds around the world to support the work? You know, all the more reason why that sustainability, self-support is so much more important as we look towards the future. These are serious concerns and issues that we are watching carefully. We don't know how things will change, but we know change is coming. We can feel the ground shifting underneath our feet. and we need to keep our eyes open. I'll close with the words of Christ and Mrs. White. Jesus said, "I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no man can work." And Mrs. White said, "Work, brethren, work while you have the opportunity, while the day lasts. Work, for the night cometh when no man can work." How soon might that night come? It is impossible for you to tell. Now is your opportunity. Improve it. That's my report, Mr. Chairman.